Hi folks, this is Rob, VK3BVW with the Mount Evelyn DX report. A few weeks ago I was at a Hamfest down here in Melbourne and had a little bit of money in my pocket, so I went down and had a little bit of a look around, see if I could pick up something I could play around with. And I was there for about 2 hours and really didn't see anything that interested me, and then I came across a guy who had a table full of shortwave receivers. And he said to me, "Would you like this nice realistic DX160 receiver, sir?" I said, no thanks. And he said, "Well, what about this nice little Yaesu FRG7 receiver, which in its day was actually really quite a nice little rig. But on closer inspection of that, it looked like it was going to take quite a bit of work to actually pull that up to scratch again, and it was a bit clapped out, and I didn't really think I wanted to go down that track. So I said, no, I won't take that." So he said, "What about this, sir?" And it's a Kenwood R-5000 receiver. Now, in its day, this was a really good receiver, and so I was interested, and I said to him, "Does it go?" He said, "Of course it goes, sir." So with that, we haggled on the price and came to an easy agreement, and I took it home. Of course, when you're at a ham fest, you never really know. You can't try these things out there, so you just got to trust the guy, and so we took it away, put it up on the bench here, hooked it up to some antennas, and it seemed to work okay. When I first turned it on, it was a little crackly in the audio there for a few minutes, and I thought, oh, maybe we've got some leaky capacitors in the audio section, but I actually cleaned up after a few minutes and it seemed okay. I got the feeling that this thing probably hasn't been used for maybe years. So I wanted to compare it with another receiver in the shack, and probably the best one I've got is the Yaesu FTDX3000 transceiver. It's got a hot receiver in it, and so I hooked up the two rigs so that I could switch between the two, hooked up a variety of antennas, and made some comparisons between the two. And in fact, the little Kenwood did a good job, reasonable selectivity, reasonable sensitivity, considering its age and considering that it was up against one of the new modern rigs. So it was quite a pleasing demonstration of what this rig could do. And for most applications, this would work quite well. So I'm going to spend some time looking inside it and pulling it apart, and maybe perhaps making some modifications over the next few months. So let's have a little look at it now and see what sort of condition this rig is in. So if we turn to Fred Osterman's Shortwave Receivers book, for the R-5000 we see that the receiver was made between 1987 and 1996, which means that the one we have on the bench here right now is at least 20 years old, and probably more like 25 or 26 years old. Osterman also describes it as a triple conversion superhet receiver, which is not strictly accurate. So when it's in AM and single sideband, it's actually a double conversion, with the first IF at 58 megs and the second IF at 8 megs. And it's not until you switch to FM mode that it becomes a triple conversion, with a third IF introduced at 455 kilohertz. The other interesting thing is that there were different frequency range specifications for different global markets. So for the US, UK and European markets, the receiver ranged from 100 kilohertz to 30 megahertz, so that's long wave, medium wave and short wave. It also had an optional VHF board which covered the FM broadcast band. For the Australian version, there was no long wave or medium wave at all. It started at 2 megahertz and went right up to 30 megahertz, and you could still get the optional VHF board. But the German version was different again. In fact, of course, in those days we had two Germanys, West and East. The West German version started at 150 kilohertz and finished at 26.2 megahertz, and also didn't have the FM broadcast band, but rather the 2 meter amateur band from 144 to 146 megahertz. So quite interesting range of flavours, if you like, available in different parts of the global market. So looking at the front panel there, it's all pretty stock standard stuff. At the top left hand corner there's a black power button. That's not the original one. The guy who sold me this rig said that the original one had broken and he'd replaced it with a power button out of an old computer. So it'd be nice to see if I can get the original button, pick that up somewhere and put that in there. That would be good. Also on the left hand side of the panel is the numeric keypad, which changes the mode and also enters in the frequencies. It's also got provision for 2 antennas. You can switch between the 2 antennas, and the rig also has 2 VFOs. And it's got 2 clocks, so you can set to local time and also GMT or UTC. Now, the numeric keypad suffers a little bit from a thing called key bounce, and that's where you might enter in, punch in one particular frequency or one particular number, and you get 2 or 3 numbers appearing on the screen. It's a bit intermittent. It's a fault that affects some receivers more than others. It doesn't seem to be too bad on this receiver. It doesn't affect anything that you do with the tuning knob. It's just if you're entering in a frequency from the keypad. So we might have to look around and see if we can find a remedy for that. It's got memories in the unit, of course, and then on the right hand side of the panel down below, it's got actually 2 noise blankers. The first one, NB1, is for pulse noise generated from say automotive noise, and then NB2, they say in the manual that was originally built to try and prevent interference from the Russian woodpecker, which was very common in those days in the 80s and the 90s. And above that is a variable noise blanket control. So those 2 noise blankets seem to actually work quite well, so I'm looking forward to looking at those a little bit more. And right at the top on the right hand side there is a selectivity switch, so you can fit a number of different filters in there, and depending on what filters you can fit in there, you can go from narrow to wide. So we'll have a look at that a little bit further when we get inside the box itself. The back panel for this receiver looks very typical, with antenna sockets there. Antenna 1 is an SO239 socket to go with coaxial cable, and then antenna 2 you can either connect an antenna of 50 ohm impedance or 500 ohms, and it's got a ground terminal as well. You'll also notice there's a DC input which has not been used. This receiver was sold as an AC unit, and if you wanted to use it DC, then you had to buy a DC operations kit which had the appropriate power cable and sockets for that. So I'd like to see if I can rig up something there so that we can take this rig out in the field and operate off a 12 volt battery. Really ideal for the expeditions. There's also a hole there where the VHF antenna goes. If you've got the optional VHF board installed in the receiver, which this one doesn't have, then you would connect the antenna through to that. Looking down on the receiver from above, you can see the top panel is quite dirty. It's quite messy there, and there's some sort of pitted holes into the paneling, which is going to be interesting to try and see if we can reduce some of that and clean that up. I'm not sure how we're going to go about that. You also notice that the plastic surround near the front panel is quite marked and chipped as well, so it's going to take a little while to clean that up. The bottom panel is actually quite clean, so it obviously has been well protected there, but the top panel is in fairly poor shape. The sides of the rig aren't too bad. One side's dirtier than the other, but they should clean up okay. But and then in the front, there's quite a lot of dirt in the controls there. Have a look at the gunge in that. That's the technical term, gunge. We're going to have to try and clear that up. I'll probably get some cotton buds and wipe that out. I might even get some compressed air and see if we can blow some of that out, and just gradually clean it up so it looks a lot neater and a lot cleaner than it is at the moment. There's with the lid up there, having a look inside, there's about 7 or 8 screws we have to undo to get into that, and it's all looking fairly neat. The speaker there, I said the audio was not that great. If I can't clean the audio up circuitry wise, I might even try and replace the speaker and put something better in there, but we'll see how we go with that. Over to the unit itself there, everything's quite well laid out. It doesn't look like there's any modifications have been made to the rig from what I could tell. I've had a good look around and it all seems to be pretty original. The big power supply over there on the top left side there creates quite a bit of heat, so that's one of the reasons why we want to put the DC power cables through there so that we can bypass the transformer, and that way we can keep the heat down, because heat is the enemy of electronic components, and over time that can sort of cause components to fail. I've marked out where the filters go there. That's the IF board that you're looking at there. It's fairly dirty, and I think some of that dirt has come through the vents at the top panel there and has settled in over the years, so I'm going to have to go through and try and clean that up as much as we can. On the other side there are 2 pins there. You may not be able to see them, but that's where you connect up to the 12 volt DC option. Here's a closer view of the IF board with the filters section there. You can see they're quite dirty in around there, and so it's going to take a bit of effort to try and get all that fluff and dirt cleaned up. There's a close-up of the AM filter. I'm definitely going to replace that one. That simply screws out and you put a new one in. What they put in the original unit was a very marginal sort of filter. I don't know why they put such a poor filter in there, and so we'll see if we can source a better shaped filter, 6 or perhaps 4 kilohertz wide, and then we'll be able to screw that straight in. The other filters, you've actually got to take the IF board out, unscrew the IF board, plug the new filters in, and then you solder the leads on the other side. So that's a bit of a task that you have to do in installing the bigger filters. I've turned the unit upside down here and taken off the bottom panel, and so you can see 2 boards here. The one at the top is the phase lock loop board. There's 4 phase locked loops that are standard and an extra one which is used when the optional VHF board is installed. And then there's the RF unit, the RF board down below. You can see here that it's a lot cleaner, and the components seem to be in much better shape. And it's really nice to be able to see and deal with components that are a big enough size you can actually hold in your hand. Surface mount technology has made it a lot harder to service units these days, but these older shortwave receivers and transceivers are actually a joy to work on, because bigger hands and older eyes can still be able to work on them. Most of the electrolytic capacitors seem to be in pretty good shape. Quite often capacitors in a receiver of this age and older will start to leak, either from the bottom of the capacitor or start to bulge out the top. But I can't see much in the way of that problem at all here, so I won't be replacing those at this stage, but I may very well decide to get a set of capacitors there to replace sometime in the future. It's a big job to go and replace them all, and I don't really want to have to do it unless I really need to. As I mentioned earlier in this video, the Australian receivers that were released onto the market only went from 2 to 30 megahertz. Now, I read somewhere that there is a modification available that you can actually perhaps cut a couple of diodes and open up the frequencies below 2 megahertz to get access to the AM band, the medium wave section. So that's something I'm going to have to explore as well. This video has gone on a lot longer than I expected it would, so I apologise for that. I'm going to finish it right here, and I'll keep you posted with what goes on as we work on this through the months, and we'll do it in stages, and we'll post up the results as we go. Thank you for watching, and if you've stuck through to the end of this, well, I really appreciate you hanging in there to the end of this video. This is Rob, VK3BVW in Mount Evelyn, Australia, wishing you 73 and best of DX to you all.